Okay.
Hello, everybody. Great to have everybody here. Today is February 28th, 2023. Actually, it's going to be pretty easy for me to remember. I usually say the dates of my classes when I'm recording, but this is going to be an easy one. It's either going to be the 30th of the month or February is the 28th this year. I think next year is February 29th, leap year next year. But so it'll be pretty easy for me to remember what the date of these meetings are. So great to have everybody on. As you know, we're going to do a Q&A. It's just an open forum for people to ask me about whatever as it relates to afterlife stuff. Okay, that's the bottom line of this session monthly. And hopefully you've watched the 10-minute intro. And if you haven't, I'm not going to repeat what I said in the 10-minute intro. That's why it's a 10-minute intro, so that everybody is on the same page. For the new folks, everybody's on the same page when we start these, okay? Because I don't want to keep repeating, and use up the time by repeating introductory stuff for this session that everybody who are repeats have already heard, okay? So it's in the emails that you got or it's on the Facebook event, and it should be in the emails that I've sent you to. Okay, 10-minute, and if you can't find it there, you can find it on my YouTube channel, and you should subscribe to my YouTube channel anyway. I think there's 6 or 7 or 8 different playlists that I've organized the 120 videos that are on my YouTube channel. Anyway, one of them is this 10-minute intro video that I'm talking about, okay? I don't want to take 10 minutes talking about that. It's like defeat the purpose. But it's great to have everybody on today. We'll go around and see whoever has questions about what, and we'll just kind of follow the flow of the Q&A that way. Just a couple of introductory stuff, logistical stuff. So I have another book coming out. So I have 3 books, right? Well, I will have 3 books. I have 2 books right now, right? So you got this book and this book. This is the Overcoming the Fear of Death one, and this is my How to Live Life one, 67 essays, short essays. And you can just find them online, just plug my name in on Google and you'll find the books. But I have a 3rd one coming out, and I'm shooting for a release date of May 1st. And it's all about my past lives that go back about 6,000 years, a couple dozen, so forth and so on. And I'll just give you a preview sentence on them. It's basically very much story-like. I'm telling stories about how they unfolded for me, and just to share with people my journey, basically. But from a teaching standpoint, understand that I'm not there to try to convince people to even believe in reincarnation, because I didn't believe in it either back in 1977 when it first opened up for me. I didn't believe in reincarnation until I started having experiences. I talk about this in the book. The purpose, my objective, is more to share my experiences with people, but from a teaching standpoint, to give people a perspective on how these things might unfold in your lives, just possibly. Everybody's different. You'll hear me talk about it in the book. But also what tends to be continuing from lifetime to lifetime. And I get into that in some detail in the book, and you'll see. Again, it's not to try to convince people to believe in reincarnation. It's not to try to convince people to believe what I claim to have experienced and who my personalities, I think, were and why, but, and so forth. That's not the purpose. The purpose is to try to help people reduce their fears about death and dying. And for those of you who know my work, that's one of my primary focuses, right? Reduce anxiety, reduce our fears about dying so we can live life now. So same thing with this book that's coming out. You'll see. And if any of you want to review my book beforehand, I'll send you a PDF copy around April 1st, about a month before, I'll send you a PDF if you're interested. There's no pressure. But if you're at all curious and interested, and if you're willing to write a review of my book, then I will send you a PDF copy, email it to you beforehand, and just send me a text or an email or something and say, hey, I'm interested, and add me to the list. So I have about 40 people. I literally have 40 people right now so far, so who volunteered. So there's no pressure, but if you're curious and you're interested and you want to read it and review it a month before it's released publicly on Amazon, just let me know. So let's get going with the Q&A today. Jamie, by the way, we go for an hour and a half. I try to shoot for about an hour and a half because I don't want to go too long with people. And then we're doing it every month anyway. So if you didn't get to your question, you will ask it the next month, or you shoot me an email or a text or something, which reminds me that somebody did do that. And I gotta find his question. So Jamie, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, Kelvin. Hi, everyone. So I watched the original 30th with George Hammond 3 or 4 days ago.
Yeah.
And it was great, and I got some more insights into it. It's brilliant. It's like revealing a new layer each time I watch it. It's great. And I just wondered, really, but are you aware of all of the well, the original followers of Jesus in this lifetime, the 12, let's say? I mean, I know you say there's more, but
there's lots more, yeah, but whatever.
Yeah. The famous ones from the Bible and that sort of thing.
Are you asking me, do I know who they are now? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah. Have they kind of gravitated towards you in this lifetime, sort of?
Some of them have, yeah. And I think I'll start with your last point, actually, the gravitational point you make there. That is kind of what I guess Jesus and I have had this conversation offline, actually, offline. And one of the things he's asked me to do is to help, I mean, I say this seriously, very seriously, to help people, whether it's, the 12 you're referring to, or it's really more like 30 or 40 or 50, who was counting back then, and not all of them were with Jesus either, personally, some of them joined us after he died and so forth and so on, and helped us continue teaching. But whether it's we'll call it the 30 or 40 or 50, whether it's that group or whether it's larger group, 500 to 1,000 to maybe as many as George and I estimate, maybe as many as 5,000 or 10,000 people actually were exposed to Jesus. I mean, when I say exposed, I mean personally. They either were touched by his words or touched by his hands, or in other words, they were in his presence, maybe on a hillside, maybe far away, but they were with him alive then. And there's a lot of trauma, a lot of grief and trauma that a lot of those people who were, let's say, in that space, we'll just say, with him, are still carrying around for thousands of years. So he said, one of the things he's asked me do is just, to help people in that respect, which I would do anyway. But so the short answer is yes, I know who some of them are. Some of the 12 you're referring to. And I know some of the ones that are outside the 12 too, let's just say, okay, who were also teaching. Yeah. Who I know who they are now. And
is that through a feeling that you get? Like when you meet them or whatever, you kind of get a deeper sort of seeing or knowing of who they are?
Well, yeah, yes and no. I mean, it's both. It's somewhat that. I've had that experience, but that's not what I'm there are others like that I'm not sure of, that those fall into what you're talking about category. Okay. So there's a whole bunch of that like that fall into that category from me. So, but I'm not sure. It's more the ones who have either told me that, and I've recognized them, and then they've said, yeah, independent from me, right? That they remember and so forth. And we've talked about what we remember, and our memories of back then coincide. And yeah, it's more that than the ones I'm talking about anyway. And then some of whom George mentions, right? And I know who they are. And I knew the ones that he mentioned are. But what's interesting is that most of them don't want to have it do anything like what I'm doing and what George is doing. They don't. They're so still traumatized 2,000 years ago. I mean, 2,000 years later now in 2023, what happened 2,000 years ago, that it's very, I don't know what, they have an emotional, psychic, emotional blockage to getting out there and talking about spiritual anything anymore, because they saw
what happened.
Yeah, they saw what happened to him.
Yeah.
It wasn't pleasant. It was so traumatic, and people were we became so close, all of us together, and with him especially, and to see how he was treated, and it's like you talk about, it's classic. It was almost classic, like you see it happen today over and over again in our own culture. People put people up on a pedestal, and they chop them down. That's a thing. We've heard about this many times, however you want to describe that, right? It's a thing that people like to do, and it's really unhealthy. We've seen it going on for thousands of years, and when we saw that with him, man, it was like, wow. And so anyway, a lot of them, they're doing their own thing. They're helping in their communities. I mentioned this in my book, my new book. I think I'm going to keep this paragraph in there, but I mentioned this, that they're doing their own things. They're helping people in the communities. They want to be under the radar.
Under the radar, yeah.
Under the radar. Yeah.
Completely understandable.
Yeah.
And one last question on that kind of theme. Judas. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean,
very confused
on that. I mean, I can't imagine what that character went through, and I mean, it's difficult to know because I've been talking with a newly made friend, really lovely person. You know her very well, and and she mentioned him, and I just thought, wow, okay. And so I just started digging and trying to, see what the story of Judas was. And then I remembered what you'd said. It's like, trying to write a story about someone who died 100 years ago, and you're trying to read these reports or accounts of him.
Well, you're not even.
It's just,
the thing
now
is,
it's 2,000 years later.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, there's no point in me trying to get it from that angle about this character. So I thought I'd come to you and see if what your knowings on him are.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because it's like, like 100 to 120 years ago, somebody died, and there's none or very little, very few written records of that person who died 100 to 120 years ago. That's what the New Testament is basically, because 85 to 99% of the human population on planet Earth, and especially around in the Middle East then, were illiterate. So people didn't know how to write, never mind read. So it was all word of mouth. And so how many people are going to be alive who are, if the person died 100 to 120 years ago, then that would mean that, let's say, for them to remember, they had to be at least 10 or 15 or 20 years old when that person was alive. So you get 10 or 15 or 20 years plus 120. So nobody's living 150 years, 130 years. I mean, people were lucky to live 40 years back then. Seriously, 60 years was possible, and some of us lived that long. But a lot of people died in their 40s. A lot of people died in their 30s back then. So you just disease and whatever, just drinking water where the cows are walking through literally, imagine drinking that water and how long are you going to live after you get all that E. coli in you. So, so you're talking about people, you're talking about getting stories, verbal stories. The New Testament is basically a collection of verbal stories from people's great-grandchildren, grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren, telling stories that they've heard that were passed down to them by their grandfather, their great-grandfather, and their great-great-grandfather. That's basically kind of generationally what you have in the New Testament, really. And then somebody started writing them down. Could write every once in a while along that way, somebody could write it down. And then somebody would read it and then say, well, I heard this story 20 years ago when I was, a little kid. Somebody read me something about this and that, and then they're passing it down. So it's like, that's basically the New Testament. So, so in terms of my memories of Judas, is that again, I don't have memories. It's like our memories of everything. It's like, how much do you remember of your childhood this lifetime? Forget about another lifetime, Jim. It's like
not much.
I know. We don't remember, and we certainly don't remember everything, right? So I don't.
No.
What I think happened with Judas. This is again, I'm piecing together these vague feelings and memories, kind of. It's not like you're talking to an encyclopedia and you just looked it up in the index and you're asking me a question. Human memory doesn't operate that way. But I think he may be one of the group. There was a group amongst the apostles who really, let's just say, when Jesus started doing miracles, he moved more towards doing a lot of miracles. When that started happening, there was a subgroup amongst the 12 or 20 or 30, whatever, teachers at the time, who really thought that was a great thing, because the crowds had been dwindling. And when he first came out, Jesus, people thought, oh, Messiah this and Messiah that, because the predictions of a Messiah coming had been out for I don't know how many generations or whatever, and there were hundreds of would-be messiahs walking around the Middle East at the time. People don't realize, there wasn't just one. There were hundreds. There were maybe thousands of them walking around saying, I'm the Messiah, at the time. So,
Some things never change.
What's that?
Some things never change.
Yeah, right. So, the crowd started dwindling when they, because it's like anything with celebrities, like, oh, he's here, you got to go hear him. And so everybody would show up. So it'd be big crowds of people, and they'd be teaching. And then people would just go away because they'd seen him, they saw the TV show. So now they go away, right? So, but they're not listening to the message of the teaching, right?
Sure.
So the crowd started dwindling, and then at some point, this is over the several year period, right? And then he started getting a little frustrated with that, and people not listening, people not following, and
Jesus got frustrated.
Jesus got frustrated. Yeah. Jesus. Yeah. And then he started doing miracle. He was doing a little miracle here and there. Every once in a while we would see that, but he started doing a lot more miracles, and a lot more people came. And so the subgroup of the apostles who thought, oh, that's great. This subgroup of the apostles thought, oh, great. It's like, oh, look, now it was several hundred people, in a group, and it went down to about 5 or 10 in a group, or 15 or 20 in a group, small numbers. And then now we're back up to hundreds of people showing up again, but they were showing up for the circus act, is the way I think, right? And then it took Andrew, my brother Andrew, who is George Hammond this lifetime, a while to convince me even that it's not such a good thing. We got lots of people, but they're not really paying attention. Look at them, they're not really paying attention to his teaching. They're just
not getting it
for the show. And I think, to answer your question about Judas, this is me. This is my opinion, because nobody's in Judas Judas's head, right? Nobody was, right? Except Judas. So,
Nobody except him. Yeah.
right, I think that I think he may have been one of those, and he got really upset with, and then also the king of the Jews thing. Okay, so I think Judas may also have been that one of those folks. You know that part of the
I
story.
don't know. No.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the Jews wanted Jesus to be the king of the Jews, like not just a religious leader, but a religious, political, religious, a political leader, of a force to fight
Right.
Rome. So there, a lot of the Jews
Wow.
were looking at the Messiah to save them from the what? To save them from the enslavement by the Romans.
Mm.
Okay, so I think he also may have been in in that camp too, and he was upset about it, right? Where a lot of people were upset. So that's another reason why Jesus was crucified. People don't realize that. I mean, the masses turned on Jesus when he said, "No, I'm not your king. I don't want to be your king." Jesus is a teacher. He's a spiritual teacher. Now, most of you guys probably only think of him as a spiritual teacher.
Yeah.
And that's the way he wants to be thought of, as a spiritual teacher.
Well, I do
Back
now, but
then,
when I was being
yeah.
taught in school,
Yeah.
no, it was something different. He was portrayed as something else. Um, but now, certainly, yes, I do. Yeah. Definitely see him as a spiritual teacher.
Yeah. No, back then there were thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people who wanted him to be their leader. That's how they interpreted this Messiah idea. Which, do you want to say something about that? You just muted yourself.
Do it there. Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. I just want to say that, in a sense, Jesus sort of had the worst of both worlds there at that moment, in that Jewish leaders didn't really buy the idea that he didn't want to be king of the Jews, and the Jewish proletariat were really upset because he was unwilling to fulfill his destiny, which in their eyes was being king of the Jews. So it's sort of like worst of all possible worlds there for a while.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Do you want to say anything more about that? Which you're much more knowledgeable about this. The history stuff than I am.
No, it's just that it was a real popular notion in the Jewish mindset at that time that they were going to have a Messiah who would deliver them from the sort of downtrodden position they were in, and he would be the Messiah would be their political leader. And there's kind of an almost military part of it too. I mean, he would deliver them kind of through force. So yeah, that was what they had been led to expect, and they were, that isn't the way it was. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
No, it's good. Thanks for raising that.
Wow.
Because you think about it, I mean, the Roman really deliver us from Rome, right? The whatever the words are, the shackles, I guess is the word I was thinking about.
Yeah.
The shackles of Rome that are around all of us Jews in the Middle East, in Judea and the whole area, Arabia, so wherever we are. It's like, deliver us from the evil shackles of Rome. That's not just a negotiation in Congress or something. That's talking about, as Witch said, that's force. That's fighting the Roman legions, the Roman Empire that's been at that time, what was it, since around 600 BC? It's 500 years old. I mean, they got it down. They know how to fight. And then, we're going to get these Jewish farmers and sheep herders and, owners of camels and whatever to create an army around Jesus. But that was the kind of expectation that was created, that was almost literally a religious, we could call it a religious fervor in Judea before Jesus was born, as Witch is saying, right? Before he was born, that was the expectation amongst the Jews, that Jesus would come and deliver them
by whatever means necessary.
Yeah, whatever means necessary to
Yeah,
kill them, not just spiritually, but politically, everything,
militaristically, yeah, my
militaristically,
goodness.
economically, everything. And
Wow.
that was the expectation. So a lot of the people, I mean, this is the way I remember it anyway. And Sharon, both of the Sharon, we got two Sharons here, can feel free to share whatever they want in this regard. We're talking about, Jamie was asking about Judas and Jesus and so forth. The thing is, a lot of those people that we're talking about, Jamie, the thousands, I'm just referring to them as the thousands of masses of Jews at the time who had this expectation that Jesus would be the deliverer of them from anything bad to everything good. I mean, that's the way the view was, okay? Their continual calling out to him to be their king, the king of the Jews, actually fed into what Widge was referring to, of Jesus being like between a rock and a hard place, not wanting to be the king of the Jews. Yeah. But it fed into that because the leadership kept hearing, well, you know, they're all screaming, the thousands are screaming that they were the king of the Jews. And so it created more fear in the decision makers to then make an easy decision for them to crucify him. You see that? You see how that worked? Because of fear. Yeah. Go ahead, Rich. Yeah, you
on both the Jewish side and the Roman side.
And the
so
Roman
the Jewish
side.
leaders had no trouble convincing the Roman leaders to get rid of this guy because they both saw a threat, a potential threat. Exactly. But in reality, it was just magical thinking on the part of the Jews. I mean, it was a ridiculous notion.
Yeah, exactly. Really good point. It was a perfect storm in a bad way. It was really it was like a spiritual perfect bad storm. This was not predicted or desired by Jehovah and Jesus before he came down, like some religious leaders today talk about. It's like no, this was a mistake. It was a horrific mistake, but it was a perfect negative storm because like you said, like we just said, the Romans saw trouble here. And when they saw trouble, especially Pontius Pilate, you got to understand his mentality. He didn't want to be in Judea. He did not want to be in Judea. Judea was backwatersville. Backwatersville for Pontius Pilate. His wife hated being there. They're in the middle of the desert. They go from Rome, Italy, to the desert. All right. But she said, but he took the job because now he's a governor, whatever his title was, whatever the English translation is. He's the head guy. Okay, maybe so it's a stepping stone for him to get a better a position in a better place within this huge, monstrous Roman Empire. So the last thing he wants is trouble. If there's trouble in Judea, there's trouble for Pontius Pilate. So he said to the Jewish leaders that, they said, yeah, you do with them whatever you want, just make it go away, basically, is what his attitude was. He never thought Jesus was a problem, really. Jesus only became a problem when this whole Messiah thing got pushed in the face of the Romans and, and the Jewish priests. Yeah, go ahead, Widge. You're still muted.
Figure that out there. Haven't figured it out. Yeah, I just wanted to mention as sort of an aside. There are a number of quote historical sites in Jerusalem today, but there are only a couple of them that are historically certain to have been places where Jesus was. And one of them was was the arraignment center where he met with Pontius Pilate. That was, like a civic building, like a courthouse. And that stood for a long time. So that still exists today. And I don't know if others, you or Sharon, have been there, but wow, the vibes in that building are so incredible. There are a few places where you can really get a jolt of the personality of Jesus. And it was just pure forgiveness and acceptance and love. It was just amazing to be there. I would encourage anybody who's in that region to go to the arraignment center and go to Nazareth, which was Joseph's birthplace, where Jesus sort of grew up as a little boy. But you get this just profound sense of his forgiveness when you're in the arraignment center. It's one of the really legit places where he was, and where he no doubt had really strong feelings at the time, because he kind of could see what was coming down. And it's a remarkable place to be.
Interesting, Widge. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Widge used to work for USAID, so he would travel around the world helping set up economies for third world countries. And so he spent a lot of time in the Middle East. But yeah, Widge, you got to take Sharon and me and George. We were going on tour over there. Yeah. Interesting. So I want to open it up to other questions besides Jesus oriented questions, and we could come back to this if people want to. But I just want to open up the floor, other questions about afterlife, et cetera, because I know not everybody is into, knowing what's going on with Jesus or what went on and so forth and so on. So I just want to keep the floor open. We can go back here if we want to, or if somebody has further questions about this, certainly go there. But anyway, other questions, other folks? I'll read you a question here from somebody, and then we can come back to other questions. Let's see, where is it? So this person said he won't be able to attend, but my question, will it be able to attend, he said. So he said, what can we do to people on the other side that have caused us harm or death on this side? So this goes to it's a really good question. It goes to the issue of that people wonder sometimes about punishment and consequences and karma. People will use different words. In other words, I'm just using different words, how people will kind of address this issue. And the bottom line, my experience of being on the other side and talking to so many former humans and other angelics who've never been human, and other friends and beings on the other side, etc., is that there's no structural punishment on the other side, but there are consequences to our actions. So that may sound a little confusing to you, but let me explain. So there's no place that you have to go to as soon as you die where you're judged, for example, by some panel or some jury or whatever. It's not like that. So that's what I mean when I say there's no structural punishment. There's no structure that exists that automatically when you die, this is what happened. No. But there are consequences to everything that we do in life. There are good consequences and there are bad consequences, and sometimes there's just neutral consequences. There are effects. In other words, when I say consequences, there are effects. There are emotional effects. There are physical effects. Can affect physical reality, right? There are emotional effects. There are energetic effects. There are a lot of different kinds of effects that everything that we do or say has in the universe, right, around us. And specifically, let's just talk about two people. If two people are together and one hurts the other person, either verbally or physically, that person who is hurt never ever forgets what happened. You guys hear this term, forgive and forget. It's a complete myth. I don't know where that came from. It's not right. I think what they meant when somebody said that is, oh, let's just move on. So those of you who've read page 54, and I can't remember how many pages, it's 4 or 5 pages long. In my book, the essay in this about forgiveness, I talk about this idea that I think that's what people probably meant when they probably meant that when they talked about this idea of forgiveness. It's just as moving on. But you never forget. Jesus, for example, just mention Jesus, as we were talking about Jesus a few minutes ago. Jesus has never forgotten that he was crucified. Has he moved on from that in that sense of forgiveness? Yes, he's moved on from it. But you don't ever forget what somebody does to you, whether it's good or bad. You remember. We all remember, right? But can we move forward? And so are there consequences in terms of that memory, to this person's question who asked me this question before today, for today, but before today? Yeah, there are consequences. And on the other side, you may run into that person on the other side, and you can do whatever with that person when you meet up with them on the other side. Obviously, you're not going to have a biological body. You can't hurt somebody biologically, physically in that way, but energetically, and you're a mind, and you have your emotions, and you have your ability to communicate. All of that still is intact on the other side. So you don't forget. And then fast forward into what I call after the afterlife, which could be the title of my book. After the afterlife, when you come back, if you come back, again, you don't have to come back in another lifetime. It's a choice that people can make or not make. But if you do choose to come back and you run into that person again, who again hurt you, let's say, in a previous lifetime, or positively loved you, you run into them again in the future lifetime, there is memory of that. Now, there may not be conscious memory. There sometimes is, but there may be conscious memory of a previous act, but there may not be explicit conscious memory, but there is cellular memory, okay, on some emotional level, and in some cases on a muscular, physical, cellular body, biological body level, cellular level, there can be memory that's transferred from lifetime to lifetime. So in that sense, that's what I mean when I say we never forget. On some level, we never forget. Even if you think of you're forgotten, your body, your emotions, somewhere there's memory, you see. I don't know if that makes sense. Does that help answer that question? Anybody have a follow-up to that person's question, since he can't follow up on his own question? The answer that I just gave? Yeah? Other questions? Other questions? Go ahead. Open up to the floor here. Unmute yourself. Anybody have questions, or write them in the chat room? Shy people. Jamie, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I've got another question about when we die biologically, and a friend of mine who's passed over now, she said that basically that there's a light when you die. There's a light. It's kind of like the NDEs, where there's a light, or a light at the end of the tunnel, and you go towards it. I mean, is that an NDE thing only, or is it when we pass over to the non-physical?
You're talking about the experience of light, yeah?
Yeah.
So let's talk about this, and then I see your question here, Ron. That's a great question. I'll in the chat room. I'll let you verbally ask it, and then I'll answer it in a minute. Okay? Yeah. So let's talk about this light thing. So first of all, your question is: does everybody experience a tunnel of light or an experience of light when they biologically die? And the short answer is not necessarily. So everybody's experience is slightly different. It can be slightly different depending on that particular individual. That's always the
Sure.
Okay, so that's always the case. That said, what's the likelihood? What's the probability? Okay, high probability that people will experience light when they either have an NDE, like in your friend's case, or when we actually biologically die. Yes. Why? Well, several reasons. First of all, the other side is a field of light because it's energetic, right? So when you biologically die, we don't have this, I'm traveling tomorrow on an airplane, I have my oranges, checking out what Kelvin's carry-on is going to be. I got orange. Anyway, got my oranges. So, we don't have these on the other side, right? I mean, we could see an orange on the other side energetically. We could even eat an orange on the other side energetically and kind of almost imagine what it tastes like, this, you know, the juiciness or the tartness, depending on what kind of orange you got, so forth and so on. But it's not the same because we don't have a tongue and saliva and glands, taste gland, you know, taste buds and all of that physically, biologically, in order to taste the orange. Okay. So it's energy. Well, energy is light. So naturally, very high probability that everybody is not everybody. So high probability that most people, 99% of the people, are going to experience light when they biologically die because, oh, energy. Wow, it's so much light. They don't initially think, oh, look at energy. People experiences, oh, look at light, right? That's naturally the way people would describe it initially when they have an NDE or when they even die biologically, okay? The tunnel of light is an interesting thing because my experience and other people's experience is that the tunnel of light is not always experienced by people, although many people do experience it. And so this is my conjecture. I have a theory about why some people will experience this tunnel of light idea more so. And again, there's no absolute rules to any of this. Like I said, it's very subjective, right? But I think that if you have, again, this is based on this is not a scientific study. It's based on me talking to people I know, lots of people I know, but people I know who have had NDEs or it's a very small number of people who remember dying and coming back. That kind of, it's even smaller number of those, but it's a small sample, you know, of a few dozen people maybe, where these people don't experience a tunnel of light, like my friend Jay, for example, in my first book, Jay Peters. I just call him Jay, but his name is Jay Peters. He said I could use his last name. Jay Peters. In my first book, I talk about his NDE. He didn't experience any tunnel of light. And he was one of the Sanhedrin who tried to get the Jewish priests, the other Jewish priests in the Sanhedrin, to not kill Jesus. And so I don't say this in my book because I don't want my book to sound like a Jesus book, but it's because it's just memory stuff. But Jay had a memory. Jay is a memory, and several other people remember Jay from that lifetime who were there. People I know in this lifetime. So he is a good example of somebody who did not have a tunnel of light when he had his NDE, and he died for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. You don't usually die. It's highly rare to be still alive after 6 minutes of no oxygen and no brain activity. 6 minutes is usually the maximum limit. And if you come back after 6 minutes, 90% of the time you have some brain damage and you can't speak or you're partially paralyzed. He came back after 20 minutes in the hospital. It's all documented. I've talked to one of the doctors, a whole bunch of doctors in the room, but I've had dinner with one of his doctors twice. And so I know this happened. That's my point, saying that. It's not exaggerated. 20 minutes, he died. He came back and he saw Jesus standing behind our friend Diane. Jesus was standing there all lit up, right? Getting him to come, helping him come back, basically. I don't say that in my book, but my point is that he's an example of no tunnel of light. Here's my conjecture. My conjecture is that I think people who've had a lot of experience experiencing the greater vastness of their minds outside what I call the 8-inch plastic bucket. Some of you have heard me use that analogy. Some of you have taken my other classes. I talk about this little 8-inch bucket part of our mind. It's a very limited kind of part of our mind, which most people are operating and live their whole life and then die only living in that little 8-inch bucket part of their mind. That's most people, 8 billion of us on planet Earth right now. That's the case for most people. But our mind is huge, it's vast. Can we experience that? Yeah, and that's one of the things that I teach people to do. when you're more familiar with that, which is still us, which is especially us, not just still us, I would argue it's especially us, then we're familiar with our mind being light. And so when you die, biologically die, you just boom, you're on the other side. Whereas when people who are, this is again conjecture, Jamie, when people who are less familiar with that vastness of their mind, in the mind being light, literally, their soul, their consciousness, their mind being light, when they're less familiar with that, when they first biologically start letting go of that biological vehicle that we call our body, they start feeling that expansion that my meditating students are more familiar with. And after you've been meditating years, it's like, yeah, a big deal. But when you never have that experience, you're kind of like, whoa, 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 I'm becoming more light, 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 and then bright light on the other side. Okay. So that is described by people who have an NDE as tunnel of light, which makes sense logically to me, right?
Yeah.
That's my conjecture. Yeah. Because based on a couple few dozen people I know, right?
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Good. So let's see. Oh yeah. So Ron, why don't you ask your question? It's a really good question. I'm sure a lot of people. I had the same question. I'll tell you. So go ahead, ask the question, Ron.
Okay. Well, I enjoyed watching the presentation, and I'm going to watch it again because I'm sure I didn't understand the whole thing.
Talk about the 30th November, just so people know.
Yeah, the 30th of November presentation. And so, my bottom line out of that was, one, I was smiling and laughing a little bit, and the other was it was kind of tragic. But one question I didn't understand was where Jehovah said he lied. All right. And so that was the movement and the whole thing. And I assume he lied to the others that were part of the movement, the 12. And I did understand the fact that, okay, let's do fire and brimstone. Oh, no, that didn't work. Okay, well, let's do karma. Well, no, that didn't. It seemed to go like, okay, we're going to try these things to change humanity, but they all seem to like not work. And so now I understand there's a new paradigm where it's like, okay, everybody does their own thing and we're not going to bother you. That's how I got it anyway. And like I said, I will watch it again, but
that's pretty good. That's a pretty good summary. I would slightly fine tune the last part. It's like, everybody do their own thing. We'll still give you teaching and guidance, but don't blindly follow us. We want to help you figure stuff out along the way, in your own way, whatever works for you. That's how I would say it a little bit. I would fine tune a little bit. So it's not that we're not going to help you along the way. It's like, but we want to emphasize that you each have free will. That's the takeaway from 30th November. To emphasize that each have free will, and you could continue to believe the old thinking that we were experimenting with, we'll call it, before. That's okay too. Free will means believe whatever, but understand that there are consequences to your choices of believing that old way that we are not encouraging now, because we have seen over the 10,000 years that we were kind of encouraging that thinking, that there were unintended negative consequences, one of which is enslavement, right? So blind following and devotion to a loving leader is much less risky than blind following and devotion to a cruel leader. Take the two extremes or anything in between, right? And so Jehovah said, Jehovah, who's loving and so forth, is not seeing that, well, we got all these blindly devoted people, not just to Jehovah, but to gurus, to Maharishi, to Swami Brahmananda Saraswati, to just, Yogananda, to, just name Sri Babaji, whatever, just name a guru who's known out there over the millennia, Buddha or whatever, just blind following to a teacher. Not that Buddha required that or requested that, but his students have, You look at any Buddhist monastery, okay. So I've taught a lot of the Buddhist monks to meditate, so I know how they're thinking, and their thinking has been they've gone down the blind following route. All right, Jehovah and Jesus in the movement are saying, that's okay if you have a loving teacher who's looking after you, but what that does is it inculcates you in this bhakti. That's the Vedic term for it, those of you who know Sanskrit. Bhakti, or devotion. It inculcates devotional attitude in you, and then in your can weaken your discernment, and then you become devoted to a cruel person, and you think that you're doing something wrong when they're beating up on you verbally or physically, right? No. And so that's the thing. So that's the message, that one of the big messages from that. Now, the lying, here's the thing, that confused me too, okay? So I went back and I said to George, because George was covering so many topics, right, in that 3 hours. And I've watched it, I don't know, 15, 20 times I've watched it, okay? So the lying thing kept confusing me, and now I understand it, what he meant now. So what he meant was, and Jehovah explicitly asked George, he explicitly asked George to use the word lie in his talk. That was explicit. And I don't know, when you watch it again, Ron, since you're going to watch it again, shoot me a text and tell me if George mentions this in the talk, so I don't have to go through and listen again to find that. But when you watch, did George say that I think I can't remember if George says in the talk, Jehovah asked me to use the word lie, because when George and I talked, he told me Jehovah asked him to explicitly use the word lie, and I said, well, what do you mean by that? It just confuses.
I don't think it's in there.
It's not in there.
No, I'm almost certain it's not.
You're almost certain that George did not say. So I can say that to you with certainty, that Jehovah explicitly asked George to use the word lie. And I'll tell you why Jehovah asked George to explicitly use the word lie. So let's just, for those of you who haven't maybe watched the 30th November, let me just give a little background, because Ron has seen it and so forth, and some of you have. Some of you may not have. George, in this 30th November talk that happened in 2014, was that 9 years ago, 8.5 years ago now, George was asked by Jehovah, Jesus, Maharishi, who used to be John the Baptist, Shankara, and so forth, and others, to pull back the curtain about why they did certain things over the last 10,000 years to help move forward humanity on a spiritual level. Okay, how to help humanity move forward. Okay, so and think of them. I want you to guys think of it, and this is the way George and I have discussed this, to encourage you to think of more as they're social scientists. They're not like gods saying, well, thou shalt do this and blah, blah. It may have sounded like that in the Old Testament and so forth, and Jehovah may have allowed that, quite frankly, and he did. The thou shalt kind of languaging, and he may have used it sometimes, and he did use it. Now, and I'll come back to this lie question that you're asking, Ron, and I'll explain this whole notion of sin that Jehovah started using and why he used that in Mesopotamia, a region, okay? But always think of them more as social scientists, not as gods. I know it's a difficult jump for a lot of people to make, but when you're thinking about very, very bright, well-meaning, very, very self-aware, incredibly intelligent beings. I'm not saying they're not powerful and smart, intelligent, very wise, intelligent, powerful beings, but think of them putting on a social scientist hat and looking at planet Earth and going, man, they're just down there killing, they eat, they get drunk, they make babies, and that's all they're doing. How can we move things forward a little bit more for them? Because we know that they have the potential of being more than what they are. Okay, that was the thinking. So you think about it through that lens, and they experimented with this. Okay, let's try this, and that's the prophetic approach, right? So Jehovah tried this and this and this. But back to the lie part, I'll come back to the prophetic thing and the sin part and again in a sec. The lie part, again, I agree with you. It's very difficult for me to understand what George was talking about when I first heard it. And I had several conversations with him. And then I go, oh, okay, I get it. It's a term that Jehovah explicitly asked George to use. Lie. And keep in mind, you got this group in what we now call India, but there's no countries back then, 10,000 years ago. So South Asia, Himalayas, and so forth. And who is it? It's Jehovah. You got a bunch of what we would call Indian gurus now. You have Jesus and John the Baptist. You got a 15 to 20 core group. We'll call them the core group. And they're all experimenting, doing the social science experiment that I talked about. Okay, they're doing the social science experiment that I just talked about in that part of the world, in South Asia. And that's when they started the karma dharma thing. Okay, sin comes, the whole sin idea of sinning comes after the karma dharma experiments, we'll call them, were already well underway for thousands of years. We don't know how many thousands of years. Nobody was keeping records of stuff, but it had gone on for not hundreds of years, but thousands of years. The karma dharma thing. Karma, there are consequences to your actions. You can't just kill. You kill a person, there are consequences. Look what the effect that it has on their family and their this, that, and the other thing in the community and all this stuff, okay? Dharma, get off your lazy... It's just Kelvin Chin, I'm the informal guy, right? Get off your lazy ass butt and get out there and do something. You're just sitting around, you get drunk, you go fish and you eat, and then you starve and you die, and then you get born again. Get out and do it. Organize yourself a little bit here as a group. How about some people go out fishing, hunting, and other people do take care of the kids, and they start the roles and responsibilities within a group. That's what Dharma started out as. It got really bastardized and went way off the rails after thousands of years and became what you see now in India. And you never, ever will hear the Bureau of Tourism in India talk about the caste system in India, which is so horrific, because it is not good for tourism to know that there are these untouchables and then these Brahmins up here. And you literally cannot touch them or marry them or do anything socially with them. Marry them, God forbid. You can't talk to them. Never mind. And they're untouchables down here, and the Brahmins up here, and you got these other classes and castes in between. And it's very stratified, and it's horrible. Okay, it's cruel. It's a whole manifestation of cruelty in India. People think of India as being so spiritual. Oh yeah, really? Yeah, you just pull back the curtain and look really what's going on. The fact that they're burning incense does not make them spiritual. Okay, the fact that they're burning candles and they got all these ashrams and and they chanting and all this stuff. Look what they're really doing in the caste system to each other. Okay, that's India. All right, so Jehovah saw this. Ron, okay? This is where, to your question, Ron, really good question. Jehovah saw this. Now that I understand it, I can explain it, what George meant. Jehovah saw this, and he did not tell the other people in the movement, what we call the movement, his other colleagues, what he was seeing and smelling. He started seeing it it wasn't as bad as it is now, the caste system, but he started seeing that what we now, George and I, call the importance of being important. Okay, that idea started the caste system started not being, it started getting bastardized and going off the rails. The karma thing started like, oh, you did this bad thing to me, that must have been your bad karma coming after you. You're responsible for what you did to me. What I like I used an example the other day in class. I ran the red light and hit you. Not my responsibility. You shouldn't have been in the intersection in the first place. Must have been your bad karma. See that bastardization of blaming the victim. The victim is now, it's all mishmashed, okay? So Jehovah started seeing the writing on the wall long before anybody else did. And so he thought, without saying anything to anybody, this is what he's calling the lie, Ron. Without saying anything to any of his colleagues in the movement, he thought, you know what, guys, great knowing you. This is Kelvin Chin. Great knowing you. I've loved hanging out with you for the last 5,000 years. It's been real, but I'm going to go off into this place over here in Mesopotamia. I'm going to do an experiment. I'll let you know. I'll come back. I'll let you know. I'll come back. I'll let you know what happens. Okay. But good on you, my Australia friends. Good on you. Good luck with you. Good luck with that karma dharma thing over. Keep doing it. Whatever. I'm going to go experiment over here. He starts the prophetic approach. So then he picks Abraham. That's the prophetic. He goes to Abraham. George tells the story out of the Old Testament. Abraham, blah blah blah, and he's like trying to get people stop killing each other, sacrificing babies and children and women, weak men to the gods. It's always the weak people. They always go after the weak ones because they're the easy targets, right? Sacrifice, take them to the top of the mountain and chop their heads off and kill them and slice them up. It's like, whatever, animals to the god, whatever. Stop that. That was his initial goal, Jehovah. But the lie, you see, Ron, he's saying to George, that was a lie because I saw what was going down. I smelled it with karma dharma. I didn't say, I let it continue. And he feels badly about it now, okay? And he let it continue in the social science experiment in South Asia. And of course, more and more people started to suffer as a result of the karma dharma thing. The karma thing, mountains of miles high of bad karma. Oh, but you can get good karma and counter. There's this magical accounting system. There's no Santa Claus that's keeping track of who's naughty and who's nice. There's no cosmic Santa Claus. Okay, that's what karma became. Karma is real in my world. I believe in karma. Karma is action, and there are consequences to our actions. But there's no cosmic accounting system type karma thing going on. Okay, that's the belief system that, in my opinion, devolved in the Vedic structure. Okay, but that was the lie. Does that make sense to you, Ron? Does that help?
Yeah, that, like I said, I went from, this is really funny how this all came about, to how tragic it was,
Yeah.
that the high beings could be doing social engineering and say, oops.
And that goes to what? What's the big message that goes to, Ron, that comes out of the 30th November talk? Pay attention to, when you watch it again, pay attention to this big message, which is, we're more like you. I'm not a god. I'm not one of these godlike figures, but if I was talking for them, let's say make believe, I'm on stage now, I'm acting, I'm role playing. We're more like you than you guys think we are. We're more like you. Okay. And I hear that and I go, yeah, right. I get it. I get the message. You're not really like us, but you are like us in the sense that they're still all trying to figure things out too. Now, they may have a lot things more figured out than you and I, Ron. Okay, we'll give them that. Okay. But they're still, nobody's perfect. That's the point. Okay. So that's the other point that I want to finish this with. And I go to Peter, had a question here. I don't know if Peter came back yet, but he had to drop off, but he had a great question. Finish with this one, which is the other point about the lie, the use of the word lie. The reason Jehovah explicitly wanted George to use the word lie is not only because of what I just said, but also because of what I said 15, 20 minutes ago about this blind, we'll call it the blind devotion, or the blind, the blind following master disciple, guru disciple, master disciple, or blind following God or a God, because not everybody believes Jehovah is God or Allah or whatever. There are many people on planet believe in gods, but plural, small g, but plural gods, but blindly follow whatever they say, or angels blindly follow whatever they say. That's the other reason why Jehovah wanted George to use the word lie. Okay, the fact that somebody could see, it wasn't really a lie though. See, that's why I had a problem with it, Ron, and it didn't make sense to me. Okay, but he's loosely using Jehovah's, in my opinion, this is Kelvin Chin's interpretation. Okay, Jehovah is loosely using the word lie, which is a very, very strong word, to make a point. He's using it. He's almost like, I don't know, like using it to excess. in a sense, to make the teaching points that I just elucidated, that George explained to me of why Jehovah wanted it. But George didn't get into that in that detail. He didn't have time. He had 3 hours and he ran out of time, and he would start the 3. He thought it was going to be 2 hours long. I said, how long is the thing going to be, George? 2 hours. Okay, great. We got the caterers coming in, because we took a break before. You guys don't know this. We took a break to go to get, I said, good, George, I got them all organized. The caterers are coming in, and like caterers are like, what the heck's going on here? I'm running around in the background. You don't see me. You see me leave my chair. Like an hour later, he finally looks at his watch. He couldn't see me waving his hands. He couldn't see the camera. There were 5 cameras, and the camera manager was waving, and we're waving. He couldn't. The lights were so bright, he couldn't see us. Anyway, he had to cram so much in. He didn't get into describing this lie thing so clearly. All right. So I'm glad you raised it, because
thank you. Appreciate it.
A conundrum for me too. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep. Let's see. What do we got here? Peter, are you back to ask the question? It was a really good question. Whatever your question was, Peter.
Let's see.
The first.
Hi.
It's not an elementary question. It's a good question. Ask the question. Go ahead.
I got actually a couple of them. One is where are all these souls coming from? We have 8 billion on the planet now, and probably if you go back to the beginning of human trotting about, haven't been 8 billion people. So where are these things coming from? Another quick question on the subtle mechanics of consciousness. We learned Sanyama, that's part of the city's program. We learned to use Ritambar Pragya. Do those mechanics of subtle consciousness still, is that another lie? Or are they still functional in this new understanding?
Yeah. So I'll work backwards. So this Ritam Pragya thing, we used to call it RBP. We used to write it in our notes when we were here. For those of you who don't know, there was this energy, we'll call it an energy program. I don't know if you know this, Peter, but George and I were in the room with Maharishi at the time when he he experimented and created this that's a whole other story. It was just an experiment that he did with us in the 5th month of the 6-month meditation retreat we were on with him for 6 months, every day, meditating all day, every day. But is it real? I think it's real. You can call it whatever you want, Peter. I mean, are there subtle levels to the mind? Yes. The issue that I have with all of this Vedic or Buddhist or whatever, school of tradition you want to talk about, when you talk about levels of the mind, I'm not into levels. I'm not into levels on this side or the other side. To me, our minds are fluid. So I don't like using these phrases because they label, Peter, and people get into labels. And then they start thinking that they need to experience the label that they now believe in, right? And then they start looking for that experience, and then they're all twisted up like a pretzel mentally. So I like to think of our minds as fluid because they are. Not that I like to think of them as fluid, because our mind is fluid. That's how we experience life, in a fluid fashion. So can our minds, I like to speak of this thing that you referred to, Peter, that we used to call back in the old TM days, whatever, Sanyama and all this stuff. These Vedic things are, I think they actually hold us back. I don't think they're lies. I think there are ways of describing things that can be easily misconstrued, if that makes sense. And I'm a teacher, so I look at things and I try to language things that lead people down a path where there's more clarity, not less clarity. I think these Vedic terms lead people down a path of less and less clarity and more limitation, which is the opposite of expansion of consciousness, which they all purport to have as an objective, right? Make sense? Yeah. The other question about 8 billion people. Yeah, there's 8 billion people. Where do they come from? And again, I'm just conjecture, okay? But conjecture based on my own personal experience, okay? of having, you'll see when you read my book, I have a memory of at least one, an explicit memory of at least one animal lifetime. And it's not an animal lifetime before I was human. It's an animal lifetime. I'm giving you a little preview here, a little like, what do they call that? A spoiler alert. It's an animal lifetime in the middle of my human lifetimes. It's very clear. And I give you like as vivid a picture as I can of what was going on in my experience when in that part of the book, that particular one. But I think I've been an animal before that too, before a human, and so forth. So some of you don't know, we got 8 billion human beings on planet Earth right now. So that we know that factually, there's approximately 8 billion, plus or minus, plus or minus a few 100,000. We'll call 8 billion, okay? At the turn of the century, only just 123 years ago, there were, if you Google it, I did Google it, it's either 1.2 or 1.3 billion. I think it's 1.2 billion, something like that, okay? That's only 123 years ago. How many years have humans been on Earth? Okay, depending on which anthropologist you look at and the tree of humans and so forth, it's millions of years, okay? So, you know, at the very least, depending if you want to talk about Homo sapiens and all that, it's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. But most people believe, you know, we've been around for a long, long time, let's just say. And back then, the population of planet Earth, you can Wikipedia this and you can look at the estimates over the, I think they go back, I don't know if they go back 50,000 or 10,000 years or something. I think they go back 20 or 30,000 years or maybe 50,000 years. And they give an estimate of population. Well, we know what it was in the year 1900. We know that it was 1.2 billion, and we know it's around 8 billion now. So where did that huge influx of human souls come from? So here's my theory on this, Peter. It's just conjecture, but my theory, because, you know, I think about things logically and what makes sense, and I try to marry it up with my experience. So I have animal experience in my past life memories, okay? My theory is that, sure, some people could say, well, there's a lot of people hanging out on the other side. How many do you know who are hanging out on the other side who then all of a sudden may have just come in? That's true. That's true, because there are lots of people just hanging on the other side saying, yeah, I don't feel like going back down there because it's a mess right now, okay? So you can make that choice, and I've made that choice different times. You'll see in my book, I lay out, and you can kind of do the math, and you can kind of see how long I think I hung out on the other side, sometimes hundreds of years, sometimes not very long. So that's one possibility. Another thing that somebody will say, well, maybe they came from Alpha Centauri. They came from some other Magellan constellation or whatever. I don't know what, you know, some other part of the universe that's not part of our solar system. It's not part, they're not just, reincarnating out of planet Earth. And that's possible too, because I describe in my book, I don't have a lot of memory of this one. So, you know, some of them I have lots of memory of, some of them I don't. This is one I don't have a lot of, but it was a very clear memory of what I did have I think I was on an alien planet. I think I was an alien also, but I couldn't see myself. But I was with some aliens who I knew, and I described the emotions and the feeling around and I was, you know, I had physical sensation and so forth and so on in this experience. So somebody might say, well, what about that? And I say, okay, that's fine too, okay? But my opinion on that, Peter, is I don't think, like, whatever the math is, 6 billion came back in, because knowing minds the way I do, and the way most of you do, I mean, just think about, you know, not just me, but the way you know minds too, minds tend to do what's familiar to them. And it's not just human minds, it's angelic minds that I've had many hundreds of conversations with, angelic minds. They're into the familiarity thing too. You know, they kind of go with what's familiar. So I'm guessing that you get minds. I think that's a universal principle of a mind, a soul, a consciousness. And so you're on another planet. I think pretty much you're reincarnating back into that other planet too, for the most part, because it's familiar. You know what the gravity's like, you know what the economic system is, or if you don't have an economic system, you know what the valuation system is, you know what food is like, you know what, you know, you're not shocked by how people look, you know, they don't have ears, you know, they don't talk, they just mental telepathy here, like everybody, you know, they talk, you know what sex is like. Oh, you don't have sex on this other planet, you just do this. Okay, fine. You know, if you went from Earth to the other planet, you might be freaked out a little bit first, you know what I mean? So you kind of, people go with familiarity. I think for the most part, the 6 billion that we're talking about between 1900 and now, I think they pretty much have been on planet Earth, gravity and food and whatever environment. I think they came in from animals. That's my conjecture. And they've mostly come in, and I think, and again, just complete conjecture, knowing familiarity of mind the way I do, I think it's a lot of cats and dogs and horses. Yeah, because they're hanging out with humans. And they kind of get to learn a little bit about what's like being a human. Or maybe squirrels, because you know they're hanging out and around a lot of houses that are you know what I mean. So you kind of develop this with deer, you know, whatever, you know what I mean. You know, the ones that are around humans more, like, as opposed to the I don't know, the elephants and the whatever, you know, pick one, you know, the jaguars, you know, the flying bats, you know, that aren't hanging around the humans as much. I don't know. I just conjecture on my part. But I think that's what, and to me, when I had this epiphany. I remember I was having this conversation with my friend Beth when I was moving from Canada down here to LA in December of 2017, right after I saw you, Don. Right after I left Don to Roma's house, Don, who's on here with us, I left Don, I crashed at Don's house for a couple of nights, and I went down to my friend Beth's house. It was a couple of nights after I saw you, Don. Beth and I were up at 1 a.m. talking, and she asked me the same question, Peter. And I thought, you know, I've never thought about that. And I thought, And then we looked it up, and we looked up the population, and we like, boom, boom, boom. And I said, you know, I think that explains why a lot of people are into collecting stuff, whether it's cars, baseball hats, stuffed dolls, you know, these little tchotchke things people have, whatever, or houses. You know, how many houses do you have? You know, it's because you when you come out of a culture, a lifestyle, let's say, where you're always, if you don't collect enough food, you're going to die. Then it's almost like people coming out of depression. Those of you who have parents or grandparents who lived through the Great Depression, like my parents did, my parents were like collectors. They were like squirrels. I mean, literally, I'm not joking. I mean, we had cases of food, cases, not cans and cans, but cases in our basement and in a garage. That's what I helped my dad do. It was a bonding relationship. I'll talk about it in my 4th book. You know, I talk about my lifetime, this lifetime. You know, it was a bonding relationship with building shelves to put the cases of food on. I'm not joking. Yeah, with my dad in the garage and in the basement. So when you come out of that lifestyle and you think about being an animal of any kind, doesn't matter what kind of animal, a lot of it is that, you know. And so when you're human, it's like, what, I can go to Walmart and I can get how many of that for how much? You get a whole pallet, and people have pallets of stuff in their garages, right? How many rolls of toilet paper? Look what happened at the beginning of COVID. You know, it's like there's no toilet paper any place. But anyway, that's my conjecture. I don't know, right?
Yeah, thank you very much. That helps a lot.
Did you have another question?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, good.
Thanks.
Other questions, folks? Gene, you have a question here. Is Gene on live with us? I can't see. Is Gene on live? Or did he drop off? I think he dropped off. Let me see. Gene, you have
here.
Oh, you're there. Why don't you ask your question here?
Sure. Are we capable of dreaming or daydreaming in the afterlife? And some NDEers have said that anytime they think a thought, it manifests over there. So would that make daydreaming and dreaming impossible?
Yeah, no. So what they're saying is accurate, but not completely accurate. So that's what I mean by this. So yeah, when we think stuff and we intend the thought to manifest, then it will manifest. That's what they're saying. But intention still exists. All right. So if you're just daydreaming and this and that, and you're spacing out, you're allowing your mind to space out. You see, that's what daydreaming is. It's not an intentional act, daydreaming. What they're describing is an intentional act. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? So
yes. So
you could still daydream.
Right. So intention in that case would have to be a very distinct thing that you can control in the afterlife then, right?
Well, it's just like this. It's just like in this. It's no. So this goes to the point that I say often in the first session of my Afterlife series. Those of you who heard me say one of the 4 main points I say in the very, very, very first session. I say there's less difference between this side and the other side than people realize. Of course, there's difference. We don't have a biological body and all this stuff. Okay, fine. But what I mean when I say there's less difference than on this side than the other side in the afterlife is relates to what you're talking about. Mentally, there's less difference. So it's just like on this side, Gene. You think about it like my intention is to get up and walk through this door over here. And then I get my body to get up and walk through the door, right? That's an intentional act. Now, on this side, Gene, the difference is it obviously has a physical biological component that can go along with it, not on the other side, okay? But just bear with me, right? So that's an intentional act. If I'm sitting here just thinking, yeah, I got to go outside at some point, that's not an intentional act. You see the difference? I'm just kind of daydreaming-ish about going through the, I got to go outside. I see the door and I look at it. I'm not actually intending and making my body go through the door. You see, that's the subtle difference between the two. So you can still have that thought on the other side without the actual intention to manifest. See,
okay.
Intention to manifest would be on this side would be me physically getting up and walking biologically through the door. That's an intention to manifest. You see, on the other side, we don't have the biological component. We still have the intention to manifest. You see the difference?
Sure. So over there, the intention to manifest is the same as us activating our motor neurons here on Earth to go do something.
Analogously, yeah, exactly, yeah.
And back to the question of dreaming then. Over here, dreaming is an altered state of consciousness. So can we enter altered states of consciousness that way in the afterlife?
It's a really good question. I'm trying to remember what my experience is. That's why I'm pausing. It's similar in the sense that, I guess the short answer I would say is yes. The short answer I would say yes, but not exactly the same as our experience here, okay? Because we're not, in a sense, leaving a biological body, right? Because you don't have a biological body. Whereas dreaming here, it's kind of like you're leaving your biological body. Does that make sense? You're allowing your mind to experience itself in this different, as you say, altered state that we happen to label and call dreaming. I say it's similar, and although I don't remember dreaming in the same way that I dream here over there, but I know that you can experience what you're saying as again, I don't like the word altered state, but you use that phrase and it's okay. But a different state, because I have seen people during my meditation classes, sometimes during the group meditations in my meditation classes. So I've had experience where I get I open up, it's like a crack in the door almost. The veil, sometimes people refer to as the veil, and I can see into the other side. And I've seen 50, 100 beings sitting in a meditation class, taking my meditation class on the other side, which you can do. You can take classes on the other side. A lot of people I do take classes on the other side. A lot of people just goof around and just go to the beach on the other side, whatever, just hang out. But you can do whatever. I'm like a sponge, you know. So I hang out at the beach too. But I mean, I take classes and so forth on the other side. And I've seen beings on the other side taking my meditation class while I'm here on physical planet Earth. Like within the last few years, I've had that experience during my group meditation sometimes. So that leads me to believe in your question, Gene, that the mind can still experience itself in different ways, what we'll call different ways. Okay.
Because they're meditating, which is sort of an attempt to evolve or change or experience a different state.
Exactly. Right.
What about imagination? Is there such a thing as imagination then on the other side?
Yeah. Absolutely. You look at just look at the 30th November folks. Aren't they imagining a better Earth over the last 10,000 years? And then from a social sciences standpoint, experimenting, that's what we just talked about with Ron and others and so forth. Yeah. Right.
Mm.
Right.
And so a lot of I've had a lot of interesting and to me seemingly meaningful dreams since I started meditating. And it seems like perhaps the dream realm is a viable path for learning. Is if we are capable of dreaming in the afterlife, is that state of being also a viable path of learning in the afterlife?
I would say that any state is a viable path of learning at any time on this side or the other side. So that would be I think that would be an accurate answer. The short answer to your question is yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And some of the dreams that I've been having seem almost systematic. Like I went through a period of about 10 days where I would be presented with a scenario that had ethical and moral dilemmas, and I would be posed the dilemma, and I had to make a decision or answer a question about emotions and how I would respond as a human being. And then the dream would reset, and there would be a variable changed. And then this process would repeat the exact same dream with one variable changed every time, like 5 or 6 different variations on a scenario, and then that would complete, and then I would go to the next scenario. So I must have gone through, I don't know, over the course of 10 days, maybe 100 different scenarios with 5 or 6 variations per dream. And it seemed all very systematic, almost like robotic. And I was just curious, is that just my mind doing this to myself for some reason, or what's going on there?
Yeah. That's your mind experiencing itself in the way that you just described, and you're clicking through different options and you're experimenting. That's to me, that's a great example of what we do, whether most people are doing it consciously in waking state, but that's a great example of, it can happen in dream state. Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Yeah.
And on the question of consciousness, I told you about the time where I fell unconscious in the ER department when I had COVID. And when I came out of it, there was a period of time where, and I know you didn't like the phrase, I said pure awareness or something like that. You didn't like that phrase, but
it's the absolute part of the pure. That's okay.
Okay. So I was just awareness, and I was in a golden white light, completely surrounded by it, and I had no perception of any thing or object or sound or whatsoever, or a sense of me, nothing. I was just awareness and light. And then I started to hear a voice calling, and I didn't perceive the voice as a voice, the words as words, or the whole thing as some sort of interrogative. Over time, it became clear to me that the voice was a voice, and that it was calling to me, and that the name that was being repeated was my name. So it seemed like the verbal recognition and thinking process seemed to kick in separately from my awareness. And I think from what I understand from what you're saying, is that awareness and thinking aren't separate, but in that experience, the whole thing seemed to kick in two different phases.
So yeah, so they're not two phases.
Mhm.
They are one phase that you're describing with two subjectively different experiences of a fluid of one fluid experience. So when you say you had this experience of awareness and light, but there was no me, you said, that is you experience. You look, if you don't have a me there, you don't have awareness of any experience.
Right.
So you had awareness of experience, but the me is not your little me, it's a bigger sense of me. I went through this in 1986 when I started getting information from the other side. Is it me? Is it not me? And da, da, da. So part of it was me, but a bigger part of me. And other parts of what I started communicating with the other side was not me, coming from not me, from other beings. So what you're describing is you experiencing yourself, but in a different way. So it's one fluid experience. You're experiencing an expanded sense of self at the beginning, what you're saying, which you called pure awareness. It's just awareness in a purer state. See, that's why I don't like the pure means absolute. It's like a state. It's a level. It's like you've achieved it. That's what I don't like about absolutes, okay, and levels. Okay, so purer, you could use that word. That's okay. Okay, see, it's relative. So it's purer than what? It's purer than the Gene that's aware of the nurses and the doctors in the hospital. Okay, that's not impure. I don't want to use it. That's why I don't like the word pure, because it makes it sound as pure and as impure. That's why I stayed. I don't, I dropped the use of that when I stopped doing the whole TM thing, right? So it's awareness, but it's a more self-aware state, or less self-aware, more aware of my own self, and then less aware of your surroundings, the nurses and the doctors and the beeping machines in the hospital room, okay? That's the state you were in, but you're still aware. Otherwise, you would not be able to tell us about anything. You see?
Right.
Okay. So that's a clarification, and a very important one, because if you don't have that clarification and understanding, you think that you think that you didn't exist. No, you exist. Your individuality still exists, but in a very different way than you normally experienced your individuality. See the difference there, okay? So then you heard a voice. Who's hearing the voice? You're hearing the voice. So you're still in this different, more expanded, we'll say, state of self-awareness, but you are hearing the voice. That's the accurate way of describing it. Does that make sense?
Yes. But the verbal part and the recognition part didn't seem to kick in until later. So it almost seemed like a separate process.
Well, it seems separate until you start to have a more until you become more familiar with this. Because I've been through this stage that you're talking about also. It seems separate, it seems separate, it seems separate. And then all of a sudden, it doesn't seem separate at all, because it's so familiar. You start to experience let me give you an example for myself. When I wake up in the morning, assume somebody doesn't call me very early in the morning. She knows who she is. But let's say I wake up in the morning. Normally, my normal waking up in the morning is I'm in dreamland, I'm doing whatever. It's like a whole different world. It's like, those of you who I've told some of you guys, Brian and others, some of my crazy dreams, they're like movies. I mean, if you had a film producer and you had somebody writing stuff down real fast, okay, you could do a full-length movie in my dreams. Okay, I'm in that. But then when I start waking up, I start going through what you would call kind of stages. Now for me, it's just a fluid waking up state now, Gene, because I'm so familiar with it. It's just my consciousness starts shifting out of the dreaming, less and less than the dreaming, more into my present physical reality, awake state, and then I open my eyes up and boom. It's very fluid, gradual now, whereas it was more like what you're describing a while ago. Okay.
Okay. And
Yeah.
one last question.
Yeah.
When my series of scenario type dreams ended, it ended with a somewhat complex scenario which didn't have variations but just had lots of layers to it for analysis. And I won't go through the whole thing because it's rather lengthy, but
Yeah.
towards the end, I was presented with a series of options, and one of the options was to have an effect on someone else's free will. And it was okay. Again, it was quite a complex scenario. But what happened at that point was everything in my dream disappeared. I was in just a space of grayness with the options, and then my hand hovered over the option. It was an option that I had to select, and then that all disappeared, and I went into complete and total blackness, absolute, total, infinite blackness. And I remained in that state, and I felt complete bliss, harmony, satisfaction, contentment, and a rest that was as deep as the
Yeah.
only closest thing that I can describe was one time I had to go to the ER and they had to knock me out with some drugs. I went into a sleep so deep that
Yeah.
it was hard to even wake me by shaking me. When I came out of that, I was rather disappointed because it was such a deep rest. But
So let me
I had
just,
that same sense of rest in this darkness.
Yeah.
But I wasn't like in the white light completely
Yeah.
seemingly oblivious in some way. I was actually, even though I wasn't differentiating or shifting my focus to anything, I was aware that I was in a space where my wife was next to me, my cat was next to me. I was aware of their presences, but my focus wasn't on them, and I wasn't differentiating them from the blackness around me, if that makes any sense. They
Yeah.
just were there, but I
Yeah,
wasn't
I got it.
focused on them. And I was still turning over the moral dilemma that I was being presented in my dream. And it wasn't so much that I think that I was, if I can remember correctly, that I was analyzing the dilemma verbally, but it was almost like taking something and turning it over and looking at it from different angles. And I was enjoying the process and very content. And I was just slowly turning over the
What's your
dilemma at different angles and thinking about it.
What's your question, Gene? Get to your
So,
question. I have to
yeah,
end,
so then,
end the meeting soon. Go
yeah,
ahead.
okay. So then I heard my wife coughing, and my focus shifted to her and my existence here and where I was. And I just opened my eyes, and there was no transition from dreaming to awake. So I was awake the whole time, but at no point did it seem like that I ever transitioned from being asleep and dreaming to being awake. I just was in this blackness, and I just opened my eyes and got up, and there was no transition at any
Very
point,
good.
it seemed like.
I'm going to
So I was
get,
just wondering what that was. Is that like, what kind of state of consciousness is that in the scheme of things?
so Gene, you're going to be my last question, Gene, because I want to get to your question here after I quickly answer Gene Foss. There's two Genes here. We got Gene, who I'm talking about Gene Foss's question here. So Gene, don't hang up yet. And then other people I'm gonna copy the other people's questions in the chat box, and we'll answer them next time. Because I want to try to keep this to 90 minutes, and we're over 90 minutes right now. So the bottom line, Gene, who just spoke, is don't think of these things as states of consciousness. Stop thinking about these things as levels, as states. Enjoy the experience. You're experiencing all the different nooks and crannies of your mind, as I described, or the psychology professor described in that Houston Astrodome analogy. You don't have to overanalyze these things. Just enjoy it. And the whole states of consciousness thing you need to get rid of, that's part of the 30th November talk. If you go back and listen to that, the whole notion of levels and states of consciousness is not useful. Our consciousness is fluid. We can have all different variations. They're not signposts of some incredible state of enlightenment or some objective that we need to reach or whatever. They are just fluid experiences. It's a beautiful thing you described, Gene, but understand it. It's the beauty of your mind experiencing itself in a different way than it has before. That's it. That's as specific as you can get. And that's as specific from a teaching point as you want to get, because you get any more specific than that, and you start thinking about it as states of consciousness or levels of this or that, you're back into this page 193 essay here. You know what that is, Gene? Because we've talked about this before, right?
Spiritual materialism.
Yep, spiritual materialism revisited. So we're going to stay away from being spiritually materialistic, right? So it's great, the experience you described to us in such great detail. It's beautiful. And then you move on, right? You don't get stuck in that room in the 100 million room castle. You know, I've had that discussion before, okay? All right.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Gene Foss, you're welcome. Gene Foss, and then we'll wrap it, and then we'll continue another month. But Gene Foss, ask me your question here.
Okay, well, I was just wondering, you had mentioned in one of your talks how you had gotten a message from the Maharishi in a lucid dream. Now, I'm just curious, I've been trying to lucid dream more to not just to fly now, which is what I used to always use them for, but to try to contact dead loved ones or just experience the other side, because I've never had an NDE. I've never had any kind of clue of who I actually am, or so I'm just curious how you figure in how you can tell in a lucid dream if you can if it's an actual visitation from someone from the other side or just something you're conjuring up.
That's the $1 million question, or maybe it's $100 million question, Gene. I mean, it's really such a personal thing to figure that out. I don't talk about this question that you're asking, but I talk about the issue of past lives and how do you figure that. It's the same kind of way. I think you'll see in my book that's coming out, I give a bunch of filters. But I'll tell you quickly them now, but it's really impossible to say absolutely. So I look at things like emotional intensity. I look at how emotionally intense the experience was, and that can sometimes give me a sense that it's more actual, real than my imagination. I look at external things, like did somebody else have a similar experience and then corroborate it with me later? That's rare that could happen, you know, but it could happen, right? And that's another factor. It's another filtration. And then to me, there's this kind of sixth sense, I guess I call it. It's a knowingness. Do you have a sense that it just was real, that it was real, that there's no other way that you can put a finger on it? And Sharon has something to say. She's going to say something about this in a second. I'm going to call on you, Sharon, because I'm sure she's going to give you an even better answer than I will. But it's that, you know, that those are kind of different filters that, and you know, and what can you do to increase the likelihood? That's where meditation comes in. The more you expand outside that 8-inch bucket that you guys have heard me talk about, parts of our mind, we more expanding into the vastness of our mind and having experiences kind of like what Gene, the other Gene, was sharing with us that he was describing, is it's his mind experiencing itself in a different way. And there's a million different ways that our mind can experience itself. But the more familiar we become with all these different ways that the mind can experience itself, the more we can use, this is what the psychology professor in the Houston Astrodome analogy was talking about, then the more we can use those aspects of our mind in our daily life. You know, I don't know if that helps, Gene.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I was just a quick follow-up question. Yeah. I know we're almost out of time. It's just I was wondering if you do feel like the learning to lucid dream will help you navigate the afterlife as soon as you get there, in the way that sometimes Buddhists talk about. You're in the bardo, or you're in this space where you're just so blown away that you're even continuing to live. If you don't have any kind experience with that you might make a decision that you regretted and you end up in the wrong body. Or I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I think anything you can do to expand our conscious capacity is going to help make the transition and the experience in the afterlife just more normal. We want, to me, it's normalizing things. It's making things less mystical, less woo-woo, the more normal these, because it is normal. It's our body dies and our mind continues. It's nothing more complicated than that, although when the experience happens, it's like, whoa, because we're so used to being in the physical body. But yeah, I think anything would help. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Good questions. Good questions. Sharon, share something and help us close up here. Yeah.
No, I'm actually, thanks so much, Jean, for bringing that up. And actually, Kelvin and I are going to meet tonight. Feel free to come. It's a grief and spirituality session in a few hours. But that question comes up a lot of, you know, is it my loved one? It's a group who have, people have lost someone, and they'll say, you know, I'm getting a sign, I'm getting a feather, I'm getting a coin, I'm getting, you know, the lights are flickering. Is it my loved one? You know, and it is really how you feel about it. There's my grandfather used to send me feathers, and not so much anymore, but now look, they will appear. But you know, I used to get like feather here, feather there, feather in Barnes and Noble, and it was like, okay, Grandpa, what's going on? And then I was near an area where there were a lot of birds, and there were like 40 feathers, and I'm like, that's the birds, you know? So it's kind of like just that energetic feeling and knowing. And I'm sure that perhaps, you know, the discernment of, you know, a dream. Okay, Maharishi, was that you? Was it a dream? Was it a little bit of both? And really, I guess it's all on an individual basis and what that means to you. And the other, Jean, I really, really, really love what you shared with your dreams, especially the, you know, figuring out your own discernment, you know, looking at objects, you know, the ethical decision, I can infringe on someone's free will. Will I do that? And it's really interesting to see that inner turmoil, knowingly or unknowingly, and unraveled in your dreams. So I thought that was really interesting as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Sharon. Thanks. Great comments by everybody. Great comments. So really good session today. See you in a month. We're back to the 30th, March 30th, whatever day of the week that is. And register again. I will look at the chat room to other people have questions we didn't get to today. And then I'll bring them up, you know, next month and so forth, unless you want to join and you can ask them again then. But thank you so much for participating and helping other people here, because really this open forum is about me helping you help each other, is the way I look at it. So great to see everybody. Again, if anybody wants to do a review of my new book that is coming out, I'll send you a PDF around April 1st. Just send me a text message or an email or whatever. No pressure. Just if you're curious and you want to do that and you have the time to read a 300-page book. Great to see everybody. Thanks for coming. We'll see you soon.